Good afternoon, friends. My name is Joan Arne Halperin, and I am the grateful daughter of Sousa Mendes visa recipients. We have a fabulous show for you today, really timely. We couldn't have timed it any better. Our moderator for today is Richard Horowitz. He's a writer, investor, and the publisher of the Octavian Report, the magazine of ideas. His writing has appeared widely, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, the Financial Times, and Time magazine. He received a BA in history from Yale University, magna cum laude, and Phi Beta Kappa. He earned a JD from the Columbia University School of Law, where he was a Harlan Fiske Stone Scholar and where he studied international law and war crimes. Richard serves on the governing board of the Yale University Art Gallery. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bretton Woods Committee and was co-founder of the Renew Democracy Initiative. His article on Sousa Mendes appeared in the New York Times in 2017, and he is writing his own book, which will be published by HarperCollins in January of 2023. Richard, so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Joan, and thank you for all the hard work you have put into organizing this. I agree with you, it couldn't be more timely. And I'd also like to thank Olivia and the whole team and Michael at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. This series, as you all know, is a very powerful and inspirational moment during the week on Sundays to celebrate people like obviously Sousa Mendes, but also others who rescued people. So it's really a wonderful program. And again, very important at the moment. So I did want to, before we get into the program, let me first introduce our two speakers. So Dr. Shimon Redlich, who many of you will now be familiar with through the movie, is Professor Emeritus of Modern European History and Modern Jewish History at Ben Gurion University in Israel. He was a child survivor of the Holocaust. He was born in Lwow in 1935, and he was saved by Poles and Ukrainians. And in 1948, he actually participated in one of the first films about the Holocaust, titled Our Children. It's a Yiddish film. And then he studied history at the Hebrew University, Sovietology at Harvard, and received his Ph.D. from NYU. He's the author of numerous books and articles on Jewish history in the Soviet Union, Poland, and Ukraine. And he's been active publicly for years to improve Polish-Jewish and Ukrainian-Jewish relations in the United States, Israel, and around the world. Slawomir Grunberg, who is the filmmaker, is an Emmy Award-winning documentarian and a graduate of the Polish Film School. His films include Everything is in Your Hands, Karski and the Lords of Humanity, Shimon's Returns, obviously, Castaways, and many others. And his film School Prayer, A Community at War, was screened on PBS and received an Emmy Award and the Jan Karski Award for Moral Courage. He is also the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and the New York Foundation of the Arts and Soros Justice Media Fellowships. And he also was the director of photography for a film called Legacy, which was nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the Academy Awards, and Rose's Passion, which won the Best Short Documentary at Tribeca and was nominated for Best Documentary Short at the Academy Awards. So thank you both for being here today. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't note that we are living through probably the worst series of events in Europe since the Second World War. People are literally, as we speak, fighting on the front lines for freedom and for their lives and for their country. There are for sure atrocities being committed. And unusually, we have a country that has a long history of anti-Semitism, but at the same time is the only country besides Israel that has had both a Jewish president who's currently in office quite heroically and a Jewish prime minister at the same time. So before we get into the history and the film, I wanted to ask Shimon, as somebody who lived through World War II, who was saved by Ukrainians, who has spent their life studying Russia and the Soviet Union and the region. How do you feel, and do you have anything to share with us about what is going on in Ukraine right now?
First of all, I would like to share with you my personal feelings. I am very sad and quite depressed for the last few days, trying to get out of it now. Maybe there is some beginning of something better than what happened during the last few days, but this situation throws me back into mentally, emotionally. It threw me back to those days of World War II and the Holocaust. I'm not comparing it, but very difficult feelings. So let's hope that the talks which are starting now maybe will lead to some kind of a peaceful solution. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to start on your story. If maybe you could share a little bit of the background. So you were rescued really twice by two different groups, one in Poland, or by a Polish person, and one by a Ukrainian family. Can you just give us a little bit of the story of how that came to happen, first with Carol and then with the Ukrainians?
Our first rescuer chronologically was the family of Stanislav and Karol, his son, Kadogny. When this is Karol planting his tree at Yad Vashem in 1986. The Kadogny family supplied us with food for about 6 months, about half a year, when we were hiding after the liquidation of the Brzezany ghetto. We were hiding in a very well camouflaged hiding place on the, as we say, attic, boydem in Yiddish, and our ghetto house. And for 6 months, my mother and my grandpa Fischl were walking once a week or once in 10 days and bringing food from their house into our hiding place. It was a nightly visit, and they opened the door each time and supplied us with food.
And did you know them before the war?
Yes. I as a child didn't know them, but that's a very important fact. For more than 20 years, father and son Kadogny were friends with my grandpa Fishy. If not that friendship, I think all this miracle wouldn't have happened.
And so after you had to move from hiding there, what happened with the Ukrainian family?
After 6 months, to the empty house underneath the attic, a family moved in, apparently a Ukrainian or a Polish family, I don't know that. And it was made very clear to us. And again, we were lucky that the woman who started living just below us did not run to deliver us to the local police, German or Ukrainian, but just told us very definitively that we have to get out of there in about 1 or 2 days. And what happened then is that we moved to the village of Rai near Brzezany, to the house of the Ukrainian peasant woman, Tanka Kontsevich, where my aunt and her husband, my uncle Lwow, were hiding already for the first 6 months since the liquidation of the ghetto.
And how long were you there?
We were there for another 6 months or so, from the winter of 43, 44 until the summer of 44, In midsummer 44, the whole area, including Brzezany, were occupied or liberated, it all depends who is talking, by the Red Army, and we returned to the city, and we lived there for one more year until we moved to Poland.
So you were rescued as well by Russians?
Yes, rescued, but by the way, I'm talking as a historian now, it's very emotional for me, this memory of being rescued by the Red Army, but the Red Army did not come intentionally to rescue me or us. They were just marching on their way to Berlin, and we were rescued, liberated on the way.
So, Shimon, after the war, how long was it before you were back in touch with your rescuers, and what kind of precipitated that?
Many years, decades. We left Brzezany in Polish in the summer of 1945. I returned the first time to Brzezany in the summer of 1991, but already in the late 80s, 1980s, I succeeded to locate both families, both the Polish and the Ukrainian family. Here we can see Karol visiting us in our house in Israel in Omer near Beersheba in 1986. Actually, this was a remark by my late mother, Hannah, who is sitting here on her wheelchair, and he is standing right behind her. In one of my visits to the old people's home where she was living for many years, she asked me, like out of the blue, why aren't we in touch with our rescuers? And that gave me the push to start looking for them like a detective. I won't go into details, but that's how I established contact, and it continued for years and years.
And then what sort of made you want to go back and see them in person and return to where you were born?
Well, this was a time that I started looking back on my life in general. I reached a certain age, and I was also very eager to meet the people, as an adult person, to meet the people who rescued me as a 7- and 8-year-old boy. It was very emotional on all sides.
And when you returned also, can you there's an enormously powerful moment in the film where you say Kaddish for your father. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened and what that was about?
Of course, my father was shot, was killed, murdered by the Germans during the last liquidation activity in Brzezany in June 1943, with many hundreds of Jews, the last dwellers of the Brzezany ghetto. He was shot at the old Jewish cemetery, Okopisko, which, by the way, is located on the way between the city and between the village of Rai on a slight hill and overlooks the city. And each time that I go to visit Brzezany, I also visit the place where my father was killed. And there is no matseve, there is no monument, because all these people were shot by guns and thrown into a mass grave. And that's where I said Kaddish. That's my mother and my father and my grandpa Fischl with my grandma.
And Shimon, your rescuers have been recognized by Yad Vashem. And you, from my understanding, got Yad Vashem to change the rules a little bit for Anya, one of the Ukrainian girl who helped rescue you when she was 9, even though the rule is generally 12. Can you? I think that story is quite powerful, but also how you managed to, get her recognized.
Yes, that was one very frightening incident that happened to us during the time that we were hiding on the attic of Tanka Kontsevich's house. Suddenly, 2 German soldiers knocked on the door or just entered, and Tanka, the mother, wasn't there. The only one who was there was her 9-year-old daughter, Anya. And Anya apparently knew very well that people are hiding and it's very, very dangerous. And as the German soldier started to go up on the ladder to an opening to the attic, she made a whole big scene. She started crying, yelling, wait until my mother comes, wait until my mother comes. And we were very lucky that within a few minutes, Tanka returned home. And then she grabbed the ladder, went up immediately, and started throwing pails of straw down to the 2 German soldiers. And as she was doing that, during the war, you had to be very fast, think fast and act fast. Luckily for us, she was doing both. She started throwing straw right on the top of us. And so that an event that the German soldiers would still go up and look, they would see only straw. And we were all covered by straw. And that's how, by that specific act of courage, this 9-year-old girl saved our lives. And that's why she got herself the Righteous Gentile award.
Is she the youngest person to ever receive it?
I don't know, I never checked it, but she is, I'm sure, one of the youngest persons, because the committee on granting the Righteous Gentiles certificate is very, very strict, very strict. So they were apparently convinced by what I wrote to them about that specific event.
And I guess maybe it's worth spending a moment on the fact that this is not your first movie, but you were involved with this fascinating movie right after the war, where you played a child Holocaust survivor in a feature film. Can you talk a little bit about the film and also how you got involved in it? Because you didn't really have
here we move already to a quite different world, where I live as a quite normal young boy, adolescent, in the city of Lwow, which, by the way, was like a substitute capital because Warsaw was all in ruins. And the post-war film industry started right in Lwow. And that's where Nathan Gross, a young Jewish filmmaker, also a Holocaust survivor, produced this film, Unzere Kinder, Our Children. And I was recommended by my teachers from the Lodz Hebrew School, named after the ghetto fighters, Zionist Hebrew School. And that's how I landed on the screen of this, one of the first representations of the Holocaust in film.
And then you left the film industry until Slawomir found you, right?
Yes.
One of the things that really comes across in the film, and I think even today, as you speak, is your attitude is extraordinarily positive. And I'm curious, given what you experienced, what you attribute that to.
There were a few reasons. For many years, I didn't think about it. Only during the last 20 or so years, when I started going back into my life, I also started to think, and people ask me, how come that you're not depressed, that you don't suffer from permanent depression and so on? Okay, I must tell you, I have difficult moments and have had difficult moments in my life. It's not all nice and sunny, but in general, I remained an optimistic person in spite of being a Holocaust survivor. And the reason is more or less, first of all, I had an extremely happy childhood in Brzezany. Until the age of 6, until 1941, I was a completely happy child. You can see me here standing in a photo place with a toy, with a gun toy. And there is one more picture which somebody brought to me. I didn't have it originally. And this gives you maybe visually the idea of a happy childhood. This is a group picture of children in the Brzezany Central Park. And according to the faces, there are Jewish kids here and Polish kids here. And I'm standing, the arrow pointing to me. And you just looking at my face, you can see that I have a happy childhood there. And when I was given this photo, this picture, I was very moved by really by emotion when I saw this nice girl just behind me, putting her hand on my shoulder and on my chest, like if protecting me. So that's one thing. I had an extremely happy childhood. Another thing is that I was not delivered by non-Jews, by Poles or Ukrainians to the Nazis, but I was saved by them. That's another optimistic point. And maybe a third one, thinking about what happened to me then, that I was never separated from my mother. My father was killed, as I told you, but I was never separated during the war, and even a few years in Lwow after the war, until age of 14, when I already went to Israel and was placed in a kibbutz. Until that moment, I lived either with my mother or with my mother and my aunt and uncle. So I was surrounded by a small family, but I was always with family. I would see in these three elements the reasons for my outlook.
Shimon, before we turn to Slawomir, you've spent a lot of time over the years trying to counter, perceptions of anti-Semitism as being endemic in both Ukraine and Poland. I think a lot of people's views are probably changing even in the last week or so, as they, have seen front and center at least what's going on right now. But can you talk a little bit about that, because that always has been a feeling in Israel and the United States, and it's a complicated issue. And how do you feel about that, and what has your work been around that issue?
Again, I'm not part of the Jewish mainstream. I must tell you at the very start. I look at this as a historian, as a person who was saved by non-Jews and not murdered by non-Jews, but even trying to be very objective as a historian. Of course, I cannot deny that there was anti-Semitism, not only anti-Semitism, but killings and murder. On the other hand, I didn't get stuck into that image like many, many Jews. And I would say even in the States, more than in Israel. because to my opinion, there is some kind of guilt feeling, maybe not very well defined, even articulated among American Jews, all kinds of guilt feeling as Jews who didn't do enough for Jews in Europe or Israel, etc. And that's why they are even more sensitive to anti-Semitism. But of course, anti-Semitism, and now I'm talking as a historian, I'm under this cap now as a historian, anti-Semitism increases in times of trouble. When there is extremism, there is also anti-Semitism. And the opposite, when there are more peaceful times, there is less anti-Semitism. But as for Ukrainians, because that's what's happening today, very important, please do not project the times of Khmelnytsky and times of Bandera on today's Ukraine, because it's a completely different Ukraine. There are some small amounts of people who are fascist and pro and very nationalistic. There are, but the majority is not. So what I would advise, not to forget the past, but also to look more optimistically towards the future. That's my feeling. Thank you.
I want to come back to you on that, but let me switch for one moment to Slawomir. So Slawomir, you have made films around a variety of subjects, but you have made quite a few about the Holocaust. I'm curious how you started to do that and why that the topic has interested you so much.
First of all, thank you for inviting film Shimon's Returns to the program. I started my documentaries dealing with Holocaust, with Polish-Jewish relationship, with subjects related to the past history and Poland Jews and Holocaust and Shoah in general about 30 years ago. The first film which dealt with the subject was Szteto, a film by Marian Marzyński, where I was a cinematographer and second unit producer. This film was shown on PBS, a 3-hour-long film, exactly 25 years ago. And since then, I think 12 documentaries as a director or co-director. Like in case of Shimon's Return, I co-directed this with Katka Reszke. So there were titles like Legacy of Jedwabne, like Saved by Deportation, films which dealt with Poland, Jews, and Holocaust. And recently, actually, currently, I'm working on the film, which is in post-production, Hidden Heritage. A film deals with what does it mean to be a Jew in today's Poland, and story takes place in Krakow, Poland. So this subject interests me a lot, and I would say within almost 50 films I produced and directed, 12 of them deals with this subject.
And what attracted you to Shimon and his story?
Oh, I met Shimon, I think it was 14 years ago. In Israel, they were Polish Jews who were found out from Poland because of anti-Semitism in 1968, meet together every 3 years. And Shimon had a presentation of his book at that time. And I went to the presentation. This is the book about Brzezany, Together and Apart in Brzezany. I believe that's the title. And I listened to the presentation, then we met 5 minutes after the end, and Shimon told me more than I heard at the presentation, and we started to think about making a film. And especially, I got really hooked because of his participation in Unzere Kinder, because if you have your main character within almost 70 years on the screen, this is already a big plus. And I think the main reason why we work on this film was because I really like Shimon, and we were friends since then. We visit each other, we talk to each other on the phone regularly, and having a friend as your main character is a great gift in documentary filmmaking.
How did you? I'm sure there was a lot of material given the drama of the story and Shimon's personality. How did you? Was it difficult to cut down the film to what it is?
No, it was very natural. Actually, when I listened to Shimon's presentation just before me entering to the screen, I saw the film. This is what is happening on the screen. Places where he was in hiding, the people who helped him to survive. But there were also unexpected things which happened during the filming process. And what's beautiful about Shimon is that he, like it was part of the conversation before, he's such a lively and happy person that, when he meets a woman or a man who plays on the street in Lwow, Ukraine, and he starts to dance. He picks up a woman who walks by and they dance together, and suddenly you have a beautiful exchange. And the same happened when he visits his apartment where he used to live in Łódź, and find out that there is a Russian woman living there, and they start to sing Russian songs. I mean, this is a beautiful personality, and if you have someone like this as a main character of your film, you jump with happiness.
Have you been in touch with, in the last week, with any of the people who are in the film who are still in Ukraine?
Who are in the film? No. I was in touch with many Ukrainians who are, just my friends, my visitors, and so on. But I'm glued to the screen as everybody else, and watch current news and follow what's happening, praying that Kiev will stay in hands of Zelenovsky. And so, like everybody else, we're really hoping for the best, and hoping that this talks between Ukrainians and Russians, which are happening now, they will lead to some kind of solution, because so many people were killed already in huge numbers. So
there are a number of questions in the chat about Unzere Kinder. So I just people are curious what language is. I think it was a Yiddish film, right? But where was it shown? What was its initial reception, and where is it available now?
Maybe Shimon will tell more, but I know it was the last film shot in Poland in Yiddish language. And the story of the film, I don't know, Shimon, what would you say? Where was it shown?
Oh, Shimon is muted. And you want to know something? Excuse me. It's my time to tell us. Excuse me, Shimon, if you don't mind, if I can just tell our friends who are here what's coming up. That's my job. Okay, Shimon, please. So on March the 6th, we have a little slide here to help my memory. Good. On March the 6th, we have the film about Roddy Emmons, and it's co-presented by the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous. Roddy Emmons was the only American soldier named Righteous Among the Nations. That's a very big distinction and honor. His son, who is a pastor, will be on the program, and Stanley Stahl will be on the program as well. On March the 13th, we have a very unusual program called Shalom China. Esther Schifrin and Nicholas Zane will be our presenters. Esther has family who lived in China for very many years. And Nicholas is a very young, beautiful Chinese man who wrote the story of Jews in China, a history of struggle, and Chinese Chinese Jews, the tribe that Israel never truly lost. Quite a title. And both those programs are free, and all we require is registration. But on March the 20th, we have a program by donation, and the film you're going to see is called Not Idly By. It's the story of Peter Bergson, America, and the Holocaust. And somewhere in our conversation today, Shimon talked a little bit about feelings about anti-Semitism among American Jews. This program talks a lot about that. It's going to be a program you won't want to miss. And our presenters are Rebecca Cook, who is Rabbi Cook's, who Peter Bergson was renamed. Rabbi Cook was renamed Peter Bergson, and his daughter Rebecca is going to be on the program. And Raphael Madoff, who directs the David S. Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies, will be on the program as well. David S. Wyman is one of the earliest Holocaust scholars. Not to be missed. It's a program with tickets by donation, and the suggested minimum is $18. And now, Shimon, if you remember the question, please.
I remember, but I also remember what I wanted to say before answering the question. Richard, you asked Slawomir whether he contacted any one of the persons connected with the recent events. Well, I contacted Tanya, the daughter of Anya, who is today almost 50-year-old woman, is for the last 2 years working and living in Israel as a caretaker in Bat Yam, near Tel Aviv. And we are in touch, of course, all the time. Immediately when the event started in Ukraine, next day in the morning, I called her and she could hardly talk. She was crying. And I almost cried with her. And now she is in a better condition. She has her 2 children, not small, they're already 20 plus, but they are both now in Brzezany, in the place which you saw in the film and about which I'm talking and writing and so on. Now as to Unzere Kinder. Unzere Kinder was produced in Lodz in 1948. It was the first and last Yiddish-speaking non-documentary film made in Poland. And I think that if you want to view that film, it's available from Brandeis University Jewish Film Institute or something like that. And the film was shown in many places during the last 20 years. And I would like to remind us of my good friend, Professor Gabriel Finder, who wrote articles about that film. And we together participated in many public events, mainly at academic conferences, showing this film and talking about the film. So it's Unzere Kinder, our children.
So I'd like to invite people to put questions into the chat, and while people are doing that, and as we kind of gather them together, I wanted to just stay on the current situation for a moment, Shimon. So, you have a very unique perspective here as to on because you have both a broad historical strategic sweep through your academic career, and then you lived through something I don't want to say now, again, as you said, it's not the Holocaust, but it's terrible what's happening. I guess a couple of questions. The first one would be, what do you think, we can do, talking as Joan was saying about how people maybe didn't do enough, even in terms of bringing attention to the Holocaust. What can we do right now? What can people in the United States or Israel or elsewhere in the world do to make a difference to the lives of the people on the ground there?
I think, first of all, supporting them publicly, talking about it, writing about it, turning to official personalities. I'm afraid that we cannot affect very much the power politics, but there is some kind of a public opinion that can have an impact. So, and the most important thing is to understand that Ukraine today is a fledgling democracy. It's like a little baby who tries to do something to defend itself and so on. But it's a positive, again, it depends who I'm talking as a liberal, as a person who values democracy, who values morality, and so on. So that's what I think can be done, and let's hope for the best. I don't know, but the situation is still very serious, very difficult.
And as a Sovietologist, which was a degree that had a lot of relevance and then seemed maybe to be obsolete, but seems to be actually particularly relevant right now, given Putin's worldview. Do you have any insight as to what the end game is here for Putin and how to the West?
You see, I dislike Putin on a very personal level, but let's forget about it. But we should also understand the reasons behind Putin's acts. Russia has this kind of empire self-image of a huge country, powerful, important in the world, and so on. And the Soviet Union or Russia suffered a terrible blow in the late 80s until the early 90s when it disintegrated. And it was very much lowered in the eyes of the world and then in their self-esteem. And what Putin is trying to do, he's trying to rebuild not only materially and armament-wise and so on, but he's trying also to rebuild the Russian self-perception of being an important player in the games of the world and so on. And please do never forget his KGB background. He's very sophisticated, he's very sly, he's very calculating, and he is a formidable enemy if he becomes an enemy. But again, I hope very much that Putin is realistic enough to realize what will be the prices that he will pay if he continues along that line. That's.
So,
and maybe one more thing, personal. I'm also under two heads concerning Russia and the Soviet Union. I love Russians. I love Russian songs. I love Russian poetry and culture and language. But I hate the kind of politics which is being led by the man who is heading Russia today.
It's very sad. Shimon, there's a question here. Many of the Polish righteous Gentiles had a difficult experience after the war under communism. Many of them were actually persecuted for what they did. Many of them had to hide it. There were stories about people's righteous, Yad Vashem medals being hidden because they didn't want anyone to know what they had done. Was that the case with any of your with your rescuers in Poland, or any others you know of?
I know indirectly of my own rescuers, of Karol, that he did not discuss this fact with his neighbors until the big change, until the fall of the communist regime. And it was not that they were persecuted by the communist regime. No, this should be made clear. They were scared of their own neighbors. They were scared of their own Polish neighbors, whose many of them or some of them were anti-Semites. And in certain backward places, there were always rumors that those villagers who rescued Jews got from them lots of money, lots of gold, and so on. So it was also a real danger that somebody may be robbed or his house being searched for gold and so on. So it was safer then not to announce it. But there is an irony, certain irony with the government in Poland today. The quite extreme nationalistic conservative government, which for its own image purposes, internal and external, wants to stress the saving of Jews by Poles, and they do just the opposite. They do the wrong thing. They claim that there were much more Poles who saved Jews than they really were, and that almost all Poles were saving Jews, which is, again, a complete nonsense. So we have always to be very careful to differentiate between the true past, true history, and how history is being used by politicians.
There's another question, I guess, for both of you. When you made the film and you were on the streets talking to people about the past and about their past, you know, the people in the film were talkative, but were there people who, did you find some people didn't want to speak about it, or was it difficult to get people to open up?
Slawomir,
there were some people,
do you remember?
Yeah, I remember a few people who one guy said, I don't hear well. you were trying to explain him that it doesn't matter, I still can talk to. I mean, there were people who normally don't want to talk to the camera, I think, but we didn't see anyone who would, openly be anti-Semite out of those where you try to talk to. But you never know.
But most of them responded, I think.
Yeah,
most of them responded positively. Did talk.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's mainly because you approach people with a smile. They think about not participating. They change their mind because they look at you and say, "Wow,
because I approach them as human beings, and I'm lucky that I know the languages and I know the cultures and I know how one has to turn to a person, so he feels comfortable."
Shimon, there's a question here, actually, how many languages do you speak?
I don't know, about 5, 6.
And there's some questions about your life right after the war. One person wants to know how you met your American wife, and another person is asking what your experience was like on a kibbutz and how long you stayed there.
On a kibbutz, I wrote a book. If anybody, by the way, I didn't send you the images of my books, but if you open the internet, Google, with my name, Shimon Redlich, you'll find all 3 books, which are half autobiographical, half historical, one about Brzezany, one about Lwow, and the third one about my first years in Israel. And I was almost 2 years in a kibbutz at the very beginning. It made me an Israeli, at least outwardly an Israeli. I looked like an Israeli, but it was not simple at all. I can just tell you that as a youngster, I felt better. It may sound crazy, but I felt better in Lodz, in my Hebrew school, than in the kibbutz, where I spent about almost 2 years. And what else? There was another question besides the kibbutz. What was?
Oh, no, that was, how you met your wife was the question.
Okay, it's important, it's important. And I must tell you that my American born wife supported me throughout all my returns to Brzezany, because sometimes if your family and your wife doesn't support you, things become impossible. So I met her when I studied for my Ph.D. at NYU, and the rest is history.
So, Shimon, someone is asking a very interesting question that they were just talking to a number of psychotherapists that were talking about the trauma that war is going to have on children. And, given you as the person is saying, you coped with this through becoming a historian and by honoring your rescuers, and you talked about why you think you had a positive attitude after it. What do you have any thoughts as to what should be done to address the impact of the war right now on children?
Just help as much as you can, mainly physically, by supplying food, by supplying clothes. I still don't fully grasp the problem of refugees, because I was more concerned during the last 2-3 days with what was going on inside Ukraine, and not so much with the question what happens with the people who are flowing and getting out of Ukraine. But this will be another problem of refugees, another refugee problem.
Shimon, somebody's pointing out that in Ramat Gan, they're flying, Ukrainian flags. It's certainly true here in New York. You talked about kind of the new Ukraine and liberal democracy, but I'm curious, there have been videos of Ukrainian soldiers thanking Israel, et cetera, and there does seem to be a change. What do you attribute that to? I mean, do you think, why is the new generation there seem to be different than 50, 80 years ago, whereas in other countries, maybe that has not happened?
Because what happened all over Eastern Europe, there were some years of freedom, of opening up to the West, influences of democracy, liberalism. Let's not kid ourselves. As I said, it's a very young and breakable entity, but it has a future if the world let it develop. If the world doesn't kill it at its infancy, so to say. So I'm quite optimistic if there will be a chance. On the other hand, I understand the sensitivity of the older generation of Jews when they see the Ukrainian colors flying, and when they see the trizub, the emblem, the symbol of Ukraine, which once was the symbol of extreme Ukrainian nationalism. But we have to overcome these old images and look at the present, towards the future. And I know it's difficult, but we should free ourselves of these very strong images that every Ukrainian is an anti-Semite and many would murder Jews. This was maybe true 3 generations in the past ago, but not today.
Shimon, I want to thank you. There's someone in the chat saying that you're a national treasure. I don't know which. I think both the U.S. and Israel might have an argument over.
But I'm not a nationalist. I hope you understood that.
Right. No, that we know. Joan, do you want to? I guess maybe is now the time for any final thoughts from Shimon and Slava.
I'm having a very hard time interrupting because it's all so important and so for today. We usually end our programs with some concluding thoughts, and we thought maybe Richard, you would start with yours, then Slawik, and then Shimon at the end with his concluding thoughts. Then I get a few minutes at the end to say goodbye. Okay.
I mean,
So Richard.
Sure. I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and I'd like to thank Slawomir for bringing Shimon's story to all of us, and Shimon for your story, for sharing it, and for being an inspiration at a really difficult moment. Again, the timing of this is quite coincidental, but maybe not. And I think your message is really important. And my experience as a researcher into this area is that when communities as a whole come together to oppose evil and atrocities, that actually in the end the good side wins, and that historically when people don't do that is when there's really things deteriorate terribly. So I'd say I'm heartened by the show of support that's going on right now, and I would encourage everybody to join into that. But again, Shimon, thank you, and thank you for being a positive bomb for all of us during a very difficult time this afternoon.
And Slawomir.
Yes, again, thank you for screening the film. Thank you for having Shimon with us. He's really a treasure, as someone says and said. I share with him the positive feelings. We both didn't believe that this aggression could really happen. It happened. Now we have to find the solution. We will not find it ourselves, but we have to support the peace which may happen as a result of the talks, and hopefully not any more people will be killed in this unnecessary, no needed by anyone war.
Thank you, Slawik. And Shimon?
I said most of the things that I wanted to say. I'll just go back to the happy 1960s, and when I was a student in the United States. And I would say just one short sentence: make love, not war.
Okay. Good idea. Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, Slawomir, Shimon. It couldn't have been more timely, and Shimon's words are uplifting. If you have not seen the film, you have until Monday evening to go to that ticket on your announcement of the program to see it. It'll lift your heart, and we need that now. Thank you, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.